Well, there's been a significant escalation in the Ukraine crisis. The United States and Britain have threatened Russia with immediate sanctions. The EU will decide on its first sanctions later today. It's all in response to Vladimir Putin's decision to recognise 2 breakaway regions of Ukraine, ordering his troops to enter to perform what Moscow is describing as peacekeeping measures. Well, tanks and armoured vehicles have been spotted in one of the areas, Donetsk. Our correspondent Mark Lobel has a roundup of all the latest developments.
This is how independence looks in the rebel republics now recognised by Russia. But President Putin's provocative move has been condemned by the West as a clear breach of international rules. The question is whether these columns of military vehicles, spotted hours later on the outskirts of Donetsk, are a worrying sign of bigger things to come elsewhere in Ukraine, with its sovereignty under threat.
We are waiting for clear and effective steps of support from our partners. It is very important to see now who our real friends and partners are.
The UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson told President Zelensky the UK had already drawn up sanctions to target those complicit alongside the US and EU to implement imminently. And they will explore sending further defensive support to Ukraine. So what could that be?
We have now enough rockets to cover all the tanks which can cross our border. We have some troubles with sea and air. That's where our efforts are concentrating right now.
Kiev's long feared Russia would create a pretext for war. In the past few days, Russia evacuated thousands of civilians from the separatist republics to Russia. Russian TV claimed Ukraine was shelling the area, claims vigorously denied by Kiev. President Putin's final act was to effectively sign away the Minsk peace agreements intended to calm tensions in eastern Ukraine.
President Putin has torn the Minsk agreement to shreds. We have been clear that we do not believe he will stop at that.
But despite tens of thousands of Russian troops flexing their muscle on Ukraine's borders, both its Western allies and Russian neighbour still talk of a diplomatic way through, but with differing views of who's to blame.
I'll lead the direct verbal assaults against us unanswered. Now it's important to focus on how to avoid war and how to force Ukraine to stop the shelling and provocations against Donetsk and Luhansk.
If we need to fight, we will fight. If we need to be peaceful, we will be peaceful.
Volunteers for Ukraine's homeland security. No strangers to Russian attacks on their country. Now preparing to protect their families, their country, they say, if that's what it takes. Mark Lobel, BBC News.
Well, let's speak to our Ukraine correspondent, James Waterhouse, who is in Kiev. And James, bring us up to date with the latest reaction from Ukraine.
Well, there are some who are disappointed with the scale of the US response to this decision by Russia last night. Washington has imposed sanctions specifically on those occupied territories, but with Vladimir Putin giving the order for Russian troops to come in on what he calls peacekeeping operations, something the West has completely dismissed. Many Ukrainians are thinking, well, is that going to be anywhere enough? One of the main worries is if those troops arrive, there are unconfirmed reports swirling around at the moment. If those troops arrive, are they going to push up to the existing conflict line in southeast Ukraine? Or are they going to go beyond and try and claim the regions as a whole, both the whole of Donetsk and Luhansk? That would mark a really serious escalation, because Ukraine has said all along we would defend ourselves in that likelihood, and the majority of Ukrainian forces are in that part of the country. So that's causing concern, on top of an increase in fighting we've seen in recent days. 2 Ukrainian soldiers were killed yesterday in a shell attack by militants, and the blame game has gone up between both sides as well, with the West accusing Moscow of trying to create this false justification for further action. And this could potentially be the start of a major escalation But as you heard there, the Russian ambassador at the UN Security Council, he said diplomacy is still open. So what does that mean? Given that the peace talks in the territories are now dead, are they now waiting to see if the West will make a major concession around Ukraine's potential membership of NATO and the alliance's expansion, something the West has made clear there is no wiggle room on?
So do you think there is a sense in Ukraine that there still could be a diplomatic solution?
I think it's more of a hope, to be honest with you. Over the past few weeks, we've had endless world leaders, foreign ministers come here in shows of unity. Ukrainian ministers have thanked different countries, including the UK and the US, for economic packages, military training, equipment, promises of support. But it's now getting a lot more urgent. The question is now shifted to, but who is actually going to help us fight? President Zelensky's long called for calm, but he's now saying, OK, but who's actually going to fight in the event of an invasion? It's going to be Ukraine fighting any escalation in this crisis. It's going to be Ukraine, in his words, acting as the buffer between this global dispute at the moment between Russia and NATO. It's going to be Ukraine at the heart of it, and along with Ukraine, that means ordinary people, both in the east of the country being evacuated by rebels, but also people here in a capital city worried about, you know, a further encirclement by Russian troops. Some are moving away. It's been a long, incredibly long period of uncertainty that Ukrainians have grown used to, but now worry is creeping in, given what we are seeing over the past 24 hours.
James, thank you very much. Well, earlier we spoke to the BBC's Caroline Davis, who is in Taganrog in Rostov, not far from the Ukraine border, where many evacuees from separatist areas have been coming through.
This is one of the main areas that many of the evacuees from the separatist-held areas have been coming through before being sent on further into Russia. Now, you might be able to see behind me that there are some emergency tents. Those have been put up by the Russian authorities here to help process people, also provide people with somewhere warm to stay when they arrive. And in this direction, you can also see that there are some temporary toilet facilities that they've put up. During the course of the last few days when we've been here, there have been queues of buses that have arrived along here, waiting with people who say that they've been travelling sometimes more than 24 hours from these regions, and they are then taken from here, taken down the road and put on trains and sent into central Russia, other parts of Russia. One train that we went to see and spoke to the authorities there was going more than 1,000 kilometres to the east of Moscow. So really quite some distance that some of these evacuees are coming through. Now, despite the fact that this announcement was made yesterday by President Putin, saying that he was sending in these, what he has termed peacekeeping troops, which of course is not how the international community views them at all, that despite that, we've still heard from some of the people here that they are expecting more evacuees to come through during the course of today.
And is there a feeling within Russia that this is as far as Vladimir Putin is going to go, or that more is yet to come?
I think that's very difficult to assess because, of course, over the course of the last few weeks since all of this has been going on, Russia has consistently denied that it was planning an invasion. If you spoke to many ordinary Russians here, there was a sense that they would say the same thing. Why is the West suggesting there's going to be a military offensive? We've been told repeatedly, and state media here has repeatedly suggested that this was not going to happen. In fact, almost ridiculed the West and people who were looking for bunkers in Kiev and various other measures that have been taking place in the West, suggesting this is not something that's coming from Russia. Now, of course, the tone of those media reports has changed quite a lot in the course of the last few days. There's been coverage of what they're accusing Ukraine of shelling these separatist areas, even on occasions of shelling Russia, or just over the border here in the Rostov area as well. Now, of course, that is something that Ukraine vehemently denies, as does the West as well. Ukraine consistently has said they have no intention of launching a military offensive on the separatist areas. And given the fact that they are currently surrounded by what the US estimates to be 190,000 Russian troops, you can see why it seems almost inconceivable that they would be the ones that would decide to start some form of offensive. In terms of how the Russian people are going to interpret this, there is some coverage in some of the papers at the moment about potential economic damage, because it's seen that after Russia has taken this step, which breaches the Minsk ceasefire agreements as well as many people say international law, that this will lead to some very severe sanctions as well. But many people wonder whether or not the economic damage that might do will be blamed on Russia or be blamed on the West.